Yeah, Dr. K.K. Rajamani is with us from Rochester Regional Health Diabetes Department. Doctor, there's an FDA warning out about some I assume, common type 2 diabetes drugs. Some patients have ended up in ERs with ketoacidosis. First of all, what is that? What's the danger of this complication or this side effect?
So ketoacidosis is a condition where there's an excess buildup of acid in the body. Okay. And when the acid builds up, that causes people to have nausea, vomiting, become really weak. And so they end up in the emergency room with dehydration.
What do these drugs do? How do these drugs work in the body that makes a patient prone to ketoacidosis?
It's not very clear how they act and how they may cause ketoacidosis. But these drugs really act by causing the kidneys to lose sugar, to put out a lot more sugar than they normally would put out. So when they do that, your blood sugar levels come down.
Okay.
And that's really how they work.
But some of these drugs do that. That's exactly how they're supposed to work, though, right?
Yeah. That's correct.
Okay.
So they're commonly prescribed
They're
drugs?
becoming pretty common now with a lot of the advertising about them. I think you begin to see them used more often.
So how frequent or how common is this negative side effect? In other words, what percentage of patients are seeing it? Do we know?
It's probably very rare. Okay. It's probably also, it's unclear whether these patients who are really on these medicines had type 2 diabetes, for which they're indicated, or whether they had type 1 diabetes.
Oh.
Type 1 diabetes is usually the condition which is associated with ketoacidosis.
Oh, okay.
So who shouldn't be using these drugs?
Specifically, patients with type 1 diabetes should not be taking these medicines.
What do you tell patients? Now, whenever some warning comes out about a drug, very often the patient's first instinct is to say, I don't want to use this anymore, but very often the doctor will counsel, no, it's a rare side effect and the benefit of the drug outweighs the risk. So what are you telling patients about this particular warning from the FDA?
Well, when we decide to use this medicine, we just have to make sure that these patients do not have type 1 diabetes. Okay. If they have type 1 diabetes or a diabetes that is prone to ketoacidosis, then you don't want to use these medicines. So if you have type 2 diabetes, then generally the risks are much less than what the benefits may be.
So these drugs do work, like you said, on the kidneys, which, as you said, is a relatively new method, a new way of reducing sugar in the bloodstream, right? So as far as this in the future, do you think these will still be very commonly prescribed in the future, these kinds of drugs?
I think they're going to be used unless the side effect profile, there are more patients reported with this problem, it becomes a bigger problem, and then the FDA will probably decide whether they want to keep them or assign a warning label to these medications, so that it's very clear in which types of patients you will use these medications.
Is it a type of thing now where type 2 diabetics are actually being misdiagnosed with type 1 diabetics being misdiagnosed with type 2 and being prescribed these drugs in error? Or is it the type of thing that these drugs were being used for both type 1 and type 2 diabetics?
Sometimes it's hard to differentiate the two between type 2 and type 1.
Okay.
It's not so clearly demarcated. Okay. So some patients may actually have type 1 diabetes but present as type 2 diabetes because the evolution of those two diseases can be
And this complication might end up being the answer to the doctor say, oh, this is a type 1 diabetes, or this is a type 2, we thought it was type 1.
That's correct. Yeah. So I think that may be the problem.
How are people diagnosed with type 1 versus type 2? What is the, I know what the difference is, but maybe you can explain to the viewer what the difference is between type 1 and type 2.
So traditionally, type 1 diabetes usually occurred in children.
So that would be called juvenile diabetes.
That's called the juvenile diabetes. But type 2 occurred in adults, usually patients who are overweight. So, but that distinction has become blurred recently. So you're beginning to see type 2 diabetes in children as children become more overweight, and type 1 diabetes in adults. So you're beginning to see more of that overlap now.
A change. But one thing we have not mentioned as we talk to you here is the drugs involved, and for people who are on them, they might want to know. So these are the brand names. I'll give my best shot at it. Invokana, Invocamet, right? And then Farxiga.
Farxiga.
Okay.
They're a mouthful, so you can see. So.
But there's a number of drugs involved.
That's correct. Yeah. And they are combination pills. Some of them are just what are called SGLT2 inhibitors, but some are in combination with another medication. So they have two mechanisms of action.
All right.
The ones you mentioned, Invokana and Farxiga, are medications all by themselves.
Okay.
And some of them are combinations with other medications.
So check with your doctor then to be sure which one you're on and whether or not you're
That's correct, yeah.
Thanks,
They're safe
Doctor.
for you.
Dr. K.K.
Thank you,
Rajamani
doctor.
from Rochester Regional Health. Thanks for the information.